Today we talk about campaign frames. Oh man, I've been really enjoying playing Daggerheart.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff in there, and I'm really enjoying it too. What's your favorite part so far?
I really love that new mechanic, that new thing. I think it's called campaign frames.
Oh yeah, the campaign frames. It's never been done before in any system ever.
Yeah, it's so unique and different.
Yes, never done before. Hello, welcome to What is Tabletop, where hopefully you got the irony in that statement, because some people in our Discord, they've been coming after us after we put out the Daggerheart review video where we talked about the mechanics we like. My name's Frank. Hi, I'm scared for my life. With me is Charles.
Hi, I'm Charles, and I have no idea why that should be a scary thing, because campaign frame's so new.
And so we're talking about this because two people, Mr. Goose himself, the Savage Goose, and our friend Zarek from Indominant, were both kind of like, how come everyone's talking about campaign frames like they're a brand new thing when Savage Worlds, shocker that he's talking about Savage Worlds of all things.
Oh, that's where Savage from Savage Goose comes from.
It's been a thing before. Setting guides, setting books in various capacities. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about campaign frames and the cool things that they do and maybe how you can steal some of that for your own game that you're designing, how we're going to steal similar ideas for the game we're designing, the pros and cons of doing each and every different thing. But first, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think. Please write in the comments already that you think that you're mad at us for having a clickbaity title. I'm sorry, blame YouTube for that one.
Also, join our Discord. We'd love to have you. We're getting people join all the time.
Yes, and of course, Patreon or YouTube memberships. We are gaining new ones every day. That supports us to be able to do this more often and more frequently. We appreciate all those of you who are already supporting, and we hope you continue. So thank you.
Let's get this out of the way. Campaign frames. What are they?
More importantly, what even is a setting in and of itself in relation to what we're talking about here?
Fair enough.
Right? If we go back to the first ever RPG, and obviously I don't know, it could be Dungeons & Dragons, it could be so many things. We're going to say Dungeons & Dragons for the sake of everything. Dungeons & Dragons arguably didn't have a campaign setting. Right. So this is a thing that's hotly contested amongst the community. Some people do not like generic systems that don't give you a setting tying into the game in and of itself. Right. There's a lot of reasons for that. And even like amongst us, we do prefer games that have a more unique perspective to them. And usually that comes because the setting and the mechanics tie in so well together. Obviously, that's not the only way you can make a game, but there is a very unique aspect to that. And so a lot of generic systems don't have that because the whole point of the generic system is that it can just do its own thing. So instead, you'll have generic systems like Suede release supplement setting books, guides, whatever you want to call them, and that becomes the setting, and occasionally mechanics are brought into that.
What is the benefit of already having the setting included within the game?
Yeah, so obviously, like we said, there's a lot of flavor that can be tied into the mechanics specifically, right? We've talked about this in the Star Wars game. You can't really use the Force die for anything outside of the Force, right? Destiny points are so tied into the ebb and flow of the Force, it really works in that regard. And so it can make the gameplay feel better. You simulationists out there who always claim that we forget about you really enjoy when mechanics do that. Now, if you're doing a more system neutral kind of a thing, setting neutral kind of a thing, you're not going to be able to per se do that. You could, right? For example, D&D has had settings, but arguably almost every version of D&D has been setting neutral or setting agnostic.
Right.
Even Daggerheart, that we're going to be talking about, is setting agnostic, where yes, there are certain things that can occasionally tie in, but like, for example, being a fighter is not exclusive to the setting that D&D is put in.
Right.
It is a part of the flavor to some extent, so that's why it's fantasy, but the setting is not like, oh, you can only be a fighter because they come from this, developed state.
Gotcha.
So on and so forth, right? Versus, let's talk about Draw Steel for a second, where so many of their classes are going to be specifically tied to Matt Colville's world. Like the Null is their version of the monk, but it's specifically about anti-magic. And it's so focused on that, right? Their rogue, which is the shadow, is so specifically tied to shadow magic and using shadows to move in and out that you start to lose the broad appeal of that.
Okay.
But you get some more unique, interesting ideas because it's tied into the setting.
So we see the benefits of having it included, within the game. What are some of the cons of having it included in the game?
Well, again, like we talked about in Draw Steel, it's really cool to have these unique and interesting things, but not everybody likes that. And I know that's hard to hear, gamers out there, designers out there. You're like, no, but it's better. It's better that the mechanics are more flavorful, but that doesn't mean that that's how everyone else plays. Just because it might be better, or it might be more interesting, or it might be more flavorful, doesn't inherently mean that it's going to produce players who are going to want to play the game, right? I think by having like what D&D has done, where you have the cleric, the rogue, the fighter, right? You have some ideas that can fit into there, but you're not locked into it, right? The D&D's bard is more, musically inclined, but the rules don't force you to have to be musically inclined.
Right. Initially, that's what I thought they were. They're basically just minstrels. But I've learned that since then, they're more of like the entertainer class. Like, we're here to, and I know I've used bards a couple different times. It's like, oh, I've got a stand-up comedian bard, or I've got a, writer bard or a poet bard. It's not necessarily strictly music, so there's a little bit of variety there.
Yeah, and like you'll have abilities that are called like song of, and again, like you could argue that's flavor, but like mechanically speaking,
right,
it doesn't do anything different. It's the bard is a support class, and that's ultimately what the bard does. The way in which it does that is usually up to the flavor of the person running the bard and doing what they want to do. There's benefits to both. I'm not going to say there isn't. But it's important to understand that like it's going to come down to what players enjoy, right?
Exactly.
So we can talk really quickly because, as we stated, D&D tends to be more setting agnostic. There are ways you can get around that. So you can have the main core book not necessarily be tied to a specific setting. It can be tied to a genre, right? Just like how Traveler is, again, system agnostic,
right,
but it's tied to a genre. And we'll talk about Traveler because it kind of also does campaign frames to some extent.
Yeah.
A little bit with their packages. But the idea is, it's sci-fi. So you know the tone, but you don't know exactly what you're getting into from a lore perspective. Like in Traveler, it does tell you like the wolf species are this kind of thing and the lion species are this kind of thing, but it also says like you don't have to use them.
Because, within sci-fi, there's subgenres too as well. So like I imagine campaign frames or settings would kind of help distinguish those from each other.
Yeah, because there's definitely a different kind of feel from like Isaac Asimov, which is like super like introspective and the fears of the future, and Star Wars, which is just like space wizards.
And like Aliens, which is like
And
space
Aliens.
horror. So yeah.
Right. Occasionally what will happen is these games that are more system agnostic will release campaign guides, settings, whatever you may call it. Occasionally you'll have the Swades of the world where not only do they do that, they then release an entire system of itself, Deadlands. And so you can play the Swade system in Deadlands, and then they come with additional mechanics tied specifically to that setting.
Right.
Now let's start with how D&D does it, which is just setting guides that are cool, but ultimately amount to nothing. Because again, there's no mechanical tie-in that really brings anything to life.
Yeah, it's mostly just about flavoring your campaigns. Like, oh, like this is, here's the setting. This is what's going on in the world, but it doesn't change the mechanics. The mechanics kind of stay the same.
Yeah, if we talk about one of the first ones for 5th edition, it was the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. And that one tried to, actually.
Yeah.
There was a Battle Rager Barbarian that said you could only be a dwarf to play this class. That was a restriction. And then it allowed you to do some cool stuff there. The Bladesinger, the restriction was only being an elf or a half-elf, right? There were restrictions there. And you want to guess how people felt about that, Charles?
They homebrewed.
Yeah, they just basically said, we don't care about that restriction.
Yeah, okay. I was like, I was figuring that either they homebrewed around it or they just said, we don't care.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is that it kind of shows you what the audience is for D&D, where they're like, no. I will create either my own world or I'm not going to care too much about the minutia of the world I'm running it in to the point where it's like, but you're breaking the lore by having non-elves be Bladesingers.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, is like when for anybody developing a TTRPG out there, us included, that's something I think I had to get past too, is that I had these ideas of my lore and how I want it to work. If it doesn't influence the mechanic, it's just frivolous at that point. Like people can play our game, like whenever our game is released, they're gonna play however they want, and that's fine. Right. And I am okay with that.
I mean, I don't like whatever lore you give me in the game I'm playing. I will almost exclusively play a version of it that's just mine.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Even with like well-known IPs like Fallout or Star Wars or Dune, I'm going to still do my version of that. Like it's going to take place in the same history, but so long ago that it doesn't matter what actually happens because then it allows me to have a little bit more freedom.
And I'm the same way because again, unless you're someone who just has a lot of time on their hands too, those things are designed to help you, especially even if you could be the most creative person in the world, if you don't have the time to sit there and develop it, these things are there. That's what they're there for, is to help guide you. Like, hey, here's the setting. If you want to play just this version of it, here's a setting for it. So.
Yeah, and that's obviously the appeal of it, is that if you don't have time, you can just be like, cool, I have the Wild Mount playbook that I can just be like, cool, let me just read this small chunk of this town before the players get to it.
Yeah.
And it gives you a lot more preparation. Obviously, the other upside is if it's something that people really enjoy, right? So like Critical Role releasing their version of a Explorer's Guide to Wild Mount for 5th edition. People are like, finally, I can play in Critical Role's world, right? That's what people enjoyed about that. I have on here as well the 2 Magic the Gathering ones that they released, because it's Magic the Gathering. Like, people care about those worlds, and that's what they're going to do. Now, some of them do have some mechanics tied to them. Mostly it's just like feats or like additional things that kind of do and don't impact it. It just adds a little bit more flavor, but nothing to where it's like, you needed this mechanic because it's so flavorful, or else what's even the point of playing this?
Could you have more than one campaign frame or setting?
The kind of the different thing is not that Daggerheart's being system agnostic or setting agnostic. It's more that they have campaign frames that have very additional things, but there's multiple of them, right? If we go to our Deadlands example here, Deadlands is only for the Deadlands setting. And there's going to be rules in there for just the Deadlands settings. There's going to be classes in there that are specific to Deadlands, right? Versus what Daggerheart does, where here's the overarching system, and then you can still play each and every thing for the most part, but there's a few changes in each and every campaign frame. So we talked about Traveler. Let's talk about it again.
Sure.
So Traveler kind of does this. And we talked about this in a very interesting Things to Steal From. One of our videos, we talked about mechanics to steal from.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have skill packages. And so what it says is, what kind of a game are you playing? Are you going to be mercenaries? Then make sure you have these skills available. Are you going to be just a normal exploratory group? Are you going to be pirates, right? What kind of ideas are you going to do? And then from that, knowing that that's the game you're going to be playing, here are some skills that are going to come in handy while you're there. So what it does is it tells you up front in session 0, when you're creating your characters, what kind of feel are you going for?
Right.
Right. And that's the important thing about having these kind of specific settings.
So yeah, it's not just tonally, it also lets you know, like, mechanically, if you don't have these things, you're going to have a hard time playing this version of the game.
Right. Like if you're going to be a bunch of merchants going from port to port selling things in Traveler, it would be a very interesting campaign. I don't know who would do that.
Every episode's a shopping episode.
That would be great. Yeah, it's going to be pretty problematic if you're going to be dealing with a bunch of nobles and none of you can persuade well.
Right.
It's going to be bad. Unless, again, that is intentionally what you're doing. Right. We talked about this several times where, like, one of my favorite tropes is the person who is the good talker not being able to talk, and it's the terrible talker actually doing that. We did that in a one-shot recently.
Yeah,
where,
I love that.
Like, you were the talker, and I was like, hold on, I shall handle this.
It was great. I love that.
And so, like, you have to have that going into it. You have to know that kind of stuff. But if you don't, if you come with your, like, kooky, funny, weird character that's like, oh, I'm a weird clown in space, and then it's like, this is the Alien RPG, my guy. You're going to die. He's like, I don't know, I'm going to bring comedy to it, though. It's not going to work well for you.
Look, I've got a chest burster too, but it's a sock puppet.
Now, I will say, before we continue to move on past it, I'm not a fan, and this is going to hurt us, might hurt a goose who's watching. I'm not a fan when you have a setting book, but then you have to also purchase a different book. So like Deadlands, you can buy the box set, and it'll give you the Deadlands book and like a bunch of different supplemental things that you can use. It does not give you the rules to Suede.
I'll tell you up front, I don't like that either, because that seems, I mean, I understand they're there to make money, but that's...
Well, conversely, we have Numenera over here, which is the same thing. It is a fantasy-esque book so far in the future that the science of the past is like magic to the people.
Oh,
there.
okay. I like that.
And that's the idea there. But it uses the cipher system. But you know what it does? It includes all of the stuff you need.
It includes all the mechanics and details of the cipher system.
Right.
And,
You don't need to purchase the main cipher book in order to play it, which is something I really appreciate. Now, granted, I'm a collector. I have a problem with it. It's a really big problem.
It's a beautiful problem. I'm glad he has it and I don't, but it's a beautiful problem. I'm glad I'm friends with someone who has this problem.
Thanks, bud. I appreciate it.
You're
You're the greatest AA coach there is. You have a great problem, buddy. Keep it up.
Keep it up.
It can be a problem from like having to purchase things, and that can be really frustrating. I think Fate Core somehow got the license to the Jim Butcher Dresden Files.
Oh, wow, really?
And I think, again, they kept the rules like, here's what it is. Now, I understand completely having the rules, like maybe you don't include all of the rules.
Right.
Right. Like maybe some of the Fate Core ones that don't fit in well with the Dresden Files, you don't include in that. And I think that's perfectly fine, and it gives it its own unique feel. But it's going to suck if it's like you have someone who's never played an RPG before, and they've read the Dresden Files, and like, oh, I get to play the Dresden Files?
Yeah.
Heck yeah. And then they take it home, and they're like, I don't know how to play this game. What do you mean I have to buy another book? Oh, this is dumb, and then they just throw it away.
Yeah, I think it's good to include at least a cursory copy of, like, at least to get the game started, you know? Like, make it playable.
If you have like an SRD, like a standard
Yes.
free version, at least include that in the setting.
Correct.
I would include a few more rules because they did pay for a book, but that's a personal thing. That's all up to everyone else. We're not going to tell you exactly how to do that in this video. Maybe in a separate video we might. But anyway, let's go back to specifically campaign frames.
Let's talk about
and why I actually like what Daggerheart does. Caveat, there might be other games that have done it before that we have not mentioned. I understand that. Yell at me in the comments. It helps with engagement. The entirety of the game is kind of setting neutral, setting agnostic.
Right.
Like everyone's like, well, it's just kitchen sink fantasy. It's like, sure, yeah, because you have like the ribbits and the clanks and the weird cat people and then the weird this people, right? I get it. That's completely fair. But the campaign frames in and of itself, what's really nice about it is they tell you, hey, here's the complexity. Here is some inspirations that you can watch and hopefully be inspired by to create this setting and campaign. Here is the tone going into it, right? If you're going to play Beast Feast and it's like, oh, hey, One Piece is one of the inspirations. It's a little bit comical, but like we can get serious, but not really. And like, you know, more lighthearted kind of a thing. Knowing that helps you create a character that's in line with that, right? I think we played a version, which was one of the Shadow of the Colossus one, right? Colossus of the Drylands, where I didn't tell them that's what was going to happen. I was just like, no, pick your characters. And they all chose goofy, like one-shot characters because it's a goofy one-shot. The contrast was actually great because it's like, you guys are all like, we're in one of the last bastions of humanity. Yuck, yuck, yuck. Oh, there's a Colossus destroying the town.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was fun.
It was fun.
We didn't do a session 0 because we just wanted to do a one-shot really
yeah.
quick. So I just like make your characters. And again, the way Daggerheart allows you guys to just make the characters really was beneficial in that regard. Though they do say, hey, when you're doing a session 0 and you pick a campaign frame, it's like you're pitching it. And that's why they give you the tone. They give you the inspirations. They give you a little blurb about it. Right. That the complexity. It's a pitch to the players. Is this something you want to play?
Okay.
And that I think is why it's better than like how Traveler does it, where it's just like, oh, hey, have you guys figured it out yet? It's like, well, I don't know. What's the difference between a mercenary campaign or this kind of a campaign or that kind of a campaign? And additionally, too, it has the sections really well laid out.
Okay.
It's here's the lore if you don't have your own lore. Here's some interesting ideas. Here's some of the races or classes and how they're going to be different by playing this specific version, by playing this campaign frame. And then it gives you, here's the mechanics section, and here is mechanics you can take.
Right.
And what's nice about it is, too, you could arguably, I don't know, take like the eating rules from Beast Feast and then put that into like another like campaign where like, you know, survival is really important. So like fighting monsters and eating them is going to be a part of it, but you don't want the like frying pan that comes with Beast Feast because it's a little too wacky in that regard.
We've talked about the benefits of campaign frames. What are the drawbacks of them?
So like we said, there's going to be a lot of people who think that the entire, like most of the game is kind of generic and boring.
Right.
Like I continue to have people reference a comment I made on another video saying, you don't know what you're talking about. Clearly you like, it's still boring and this and that. And I'm like, okay, like, I think the campaign frames do add some uniqueness. They had mechanics that are flavorful to that setting, but I can understand the problem with that. I can also understand not being a fan of any of the campaign frames that are maybe in there, right? They do have like a good mixture of some here and there, but then none of them all tie together well. I think some people found that the maps that they give you do make a large map, but it wouldn't make any sense that an Age of Umbra character would sneak their way into like the motherboard game.
Is it easy to cross over between campaign frames? Like maybe you're playing, you know, the Age of Umbra, but maybe you want to have a few of your, you know, sessions be more reflective of like the Colossus one, where okay, we're playing in the shadows and stuff like that. You know, we're being very.
But now we're gonna fight this Colossus.
But now we're gonna fight the Colossus monster. You know, like how easy would it be?
I think the mechanics you could switch over. Spoilers for our game, Charles. You guys we're going to basically
This is not live.
slowly, and by slowly I mean I think we've pretty much convinced our play group to stop playing 5th edition and start playing Daggerheart, but the same campaign.
Right.
And I was already kind of doing a Dark Souls-esque thing.
Right.
And so I'm already going to steal some of the rules from Age of Umbra without actually stealing the setting.
Okay.
Right. And so I think the way they have it does work well.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you're the kind of person who really likes when the setting is tied into that, like they have a thing called like Umbra, which is like a sickness you can have, and like you take when you lose a hope, you take a scar, but like that's not necessarily flavorful. It's a cool mechanic in the sense that it's flavorful to being a Dark Souls-esque kind of game, but it's not specifically tied to, yeah.
Like, should each campaign frame have its own special mechanics?
I would say, what is the point if you don't?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, just to be like, here's some ideas you could have, is just to inspire them. That shouldn't, like, that could just be a list of, that's one page.
Right.
But if you're not going to have, like, when you play this campaign frame, you need this mechanic. You need to make sure that these kind of creatures act this way, that these kind of monsters do this thing, right? Then what's the point in that regard?
So it needs to be more than just tonally. You definitely, having a mechanic that sets it apart from the other campaign frames and the rest of your, or the setting agnostic.
Yeah, so I would just say, personally, I would think you need to have some sort of mechanic that ties into the idea of it, the tone of it to some extent. Otherwise, what's the point of that?
So you mentioned we were going to be using campaign frames in our game. So let's talk a little bit about our game.
Yeah, so Screampunk is a game we're developing from the mind child of Charles with mechanical help from me, Frank. Hi, it's me. How are you?
It's him again.
Yep. I'm the anti-hero. I don't listen to Taylor Swift. Regardless. So I think what's going to set our campaign frame idea, and we probably won't call it that, because the way we're doing it is a little different.
Right.
We're going to have rules that are actually tied to the flavor and lore of the kind of game we're making, right? Like even in the resources we're talking about, like we have Scream, which is like the secret energy that actually powers all technology. That
it's Monsters Inc.
Right, a little bit. But like we have some things that are already going into the design that are system specific, that are setting specific. So when we're making campaign frames, we're not actually making different, worlds.
Right.
If anything, it's how it is in a timeline.
So, yeah.
And that's really, I think that's going to set us apart.
Yeah, when you brought that idea to me, I like that's a really cool notion. And I like that because it's a little different than what we've seen in other TTRPGs. Because we're like, here's this decade setting, and then here's the next decade,
right?
And they're different. Mechanically, they're different games.
Tone wise,
but it's still the same, mostly the same mechanics and same general idea. Like it's all a part of the same history too, the same lore.
Yeah, and so we're gonna give you a sneak peek of what we're gonna do. Again, we'll call them something different. We'll probably call them like decade settings or something like that.
Something, yeah.
Eras of monsters, whatever. But there's an interesting through line that, as I was developing the ideas and these things, that started to develop as we went along. So the first one takes place in the 1940s. It's called A Matter of Family, and that one is basically going to be you're all gangsters in Chicago in the 1940s, and you have your own mafia family. And you're trying to run crime syndicates and do these things, but you're monsters, right? So there's the obvious allegory of the monsters wanting to not be known, paralleling crime and syndicates and stuff like that.
You want everything to be sneaky in this. You want things to be more underhanded. And again, and also it's very old world if you think about it, because when you look at like the mafia kind of settings, mafia is like, oh, it's old world, old family type stuff.
Right.
The laws don't apply to us because we have our own way of doing things. Justice is what we see it as.
Right.
And I like that kind of vibe.
Yeah. And so mechanically, we're going to probably have you be able to make your own mafia family.
Yep.
All right. We're going to look at some faction mechanics from other games. Stay tuned for that video in a few weeks. Yep. And we're going to be able to do that. We also came up with a very interesting idea of like a blackmail mechanic where like you can find and develop secrets. What those secrets are is going to be up to your playgroup, but you'll have them as a resource that you can then spend to influence other families and either force them to do things they might not want to do, or maybe take hits out on other people, right? We're going to have stuff for that set in the 1940s Chicago era.
The next one
is called Suburban Nightmare because I wanted something in the 1950s.
Yeah.
And so...
well, that was a very good... It's a cool setting, too, because if you think about, like, some of, like, the monster settings...
The Munsters.
The Munsters and Addams Family and stuff like that.
Yeah, very sitcom. Who's next door? I Dream of Jeannie. Kind of like we have to hide who we really are next door.
Yeah, Bewitched.
Right. And so again, what you're starting to see is before all the monsters were in the shadows. They were pulling some strings, but they were trying not to be brought to light. Now, some of the monsters are like, no, we're going to try to live a normal life, but we can't let our next door neighbors know that, or else who knows what could happen to us. Spoiler alert, if you've seen Shape of Water, you're going to get experimented on. That's what's going to happen to you.
The G-Men.
So we're definitely going to have, some aspect of like, what is the point of you being there? And maybe it's literally like Monsters Inc. Like you're just trying to scare the neighbors and be like, I saw a werewolf the other day, and it's like, werewolves don't exist, honey. It's clearly your dementia popping up.
So, or just again, I think the mechanic of like we're still trying to hide, but really it's about identity. Can you truly hide who you are?
And obviously you can see the tonal shift of like the very serious mafioso nature and the more silly sitcom oriented one, which we think our game can still apply to in that regard.
Junior's harassing the neighbors again.
Yeah. So this third one is kind of the main one Charles wanted originally.
Correct.
Before we came up with this idea of having different ones. So you can explain that a little bit more.
This one's called The Ones in the Dark. It's settings 1960s. As you can see, we're kind of going through the decades. This is more of like, think of like Men in Black, where it's like only a handful of people know about the monsters and stuff like that, and they're trying to keep those worlds separate. Mm-hmm. They're not saying you can't be a monster. They're not saying we're here to kill all monsters. They're just trying to keep the peace, like make sure the veil's not being torn between the worlds. And
we're going to come up with mechanics for like how can you show most likely some sort of like progress clock. Like, hey, these villains are slowly pushing and pushing and pushing, and you're getting closer and closer. And so we'll also have mechanics what happens when the veil is inevitably torn, because that is the point of the villains. They want to tear the veil, and maybe the heroes are able to stop them, but maybe not. And so we wanted to have mechanics for that as well.
And then our next one's going to take place in the 70s.
Which means you know what it means. War. Huh. What is it good for?
Oh, I thought we had to stop after that for copyright reasons.
Oh, no, we can't sing well enough that they're going to sue us.
I'm a little hurt, but not really. So let's move on.
It's called The Horrors of War. So at some point, the monsters get found out, and instead of trying to kick them out or doing that, you use them for war. What else would you use a bunch of powerful monsters for, if not for war? And so this is basically like a hex crawl battle map. So the idea is you get your mission, you'd get dropped on helicopters, you do your mission and come back to base. And then you do that constantly. And so there's going to be a lot of mechanics about like exploring the jungles of Vietnam and fighting a bunch of people and like using your powers there, and like the psychological trauma that comes with that, because we can do that in our game.
And maybe they find new monsters because they're monsters that existed over there that they didn't know about. So
so there's a lot of fun to be had there. And then of course we have the 80s. Who could forget the 80s? So we're getting another lighthearted one with Slasher School. At this point, monsters have been integrated permanently into society.
Literally eat your heart out, John Hughes.
And so we're going to definitely have mechanics tied around like popularity and like obvious like tropes of like, oh yeah, the Grimborn are all the goths, and then like the jocks are all the monstrosity people, and this and that.
And I would hate to compare it to anything Disney's ever made, but zombies.
Yeah, it is a little like that. I was going to say Scooby-Doo to some extent too. Like maybe you're solving mysteries.
More so that, I feel, but yeah.
Like, man, we got to solve what happened to the principal. Like something's up with him, man. Zoinks. Definitely John Hughes movies are going to be inspiring.
But yeah, 100%.
And then that brings us to the 90s. And at this point, I'm like, we need the like super difficult expert level hard mode one. And so Charles has said before he wanted humans to be like the weakest.
Oh, absolutely.
And so what better thing to do than to have the Van Helsing Vanguard in the 90s, where they are sick and tired, these humans, of the monsters being in charge, and now they're putting them back in their place by finding them and getting rid of them.
Yeah.
And so it's meant to be the hardest one. Like this is like do or die, you dying a lot kind of setting. And we're going to have a lot of mechanics based around like how to make adversaries stronger than usual and how to handle that. And as humans, what makes you weaker, stuff like that.
And how can the humans basically get a leg up on these monsters when they don't have anything supernatural helping them?
Yeah, so we're going to definitely have a lot of fun in those regards. And again, you can see the through line that's happening, a story that we're telling in the different decades that we have that you can explore. And I think that ties it all better to the game that we're developing. So. There's an interesting story to be had there, but still a lot of freedom that can come from a lot of that. So
let us know what you think about campaign frames and how they're used in tabletop games.
Yeah, setting books. Do you prefer those? Do you prefer what we talked about where it's like included in there already? Do you want them to be separate? Are you going to tell us, hey, we're dumb, they should just be tied into the thing already? And if you want to do additional kinds of settings. You should just make different books and have different mechanics in that. Let us know what you think, because we're interested to hear for sure.
Yeah, and because this is such a new mechanic, new system, no one's
Charles,
ever-
you should know by this point that we can't say that anymore.
It's new to me.
All right, stay witty.
Stay
Good
witty.
grief.